All right, good morning, everybody. My clock shows 10 o'clock. We'll start another DWD webinar. Today, Carrie's going to talk about board responsibilities. This is probably one of my favorite topics. I remember when I was a new board member, I struggled with what is my purpose? What should I be doing here? What are my responsibilities? A webinar like this would have been really helpful for me, so I hope it's as helpful for you guys. For our new viewers, I want to take a moment to introduce our not-for-profit team here at DWD. So my name is Tyson Moore. I'm an accounting supervisor here in the not-for-profit division. Joining us today is Director Phil McKenzie, our presenter, Carrie Minnick, and our newest member, Audrey Lemon. Just as a reminder, the webinar is live, it's interactive. So if you have questions, make sure you use Zoom's question and answer feature. You should find that there at the bottom of your screen. We'll be answering questions throughout the presentation. Also, Carrie's slides will be emailed out to everyone attending after we're done here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carrie to get us started.
Thanks, Tyson. As Tyson said, today we're going to talk about board responsibilities. And I know we have a lot of different people representing different areas within nonprofits joining us today. I know we have some board members, executive directors, staff. So probably some different experiences with board service, whether you are serving currently on a board, whether you're looking to join a board, or maybe you are a staff person that gets involved with that board. So we kind of want to talk about some different aspects of board service. First of all, I want to talk just briefly, some introduction, some basic nonprofit things that we need to be reminded of. Want to go over some things to ask before joining a board, before jumping in, and then talk about the responsibilities, both as board members, but then also as a committee member and an officer. So let's get started. So first of all, nonprofit. So when we think of the word nonprofit, that is really just a term that the state uses. So we are in Indiana, so I will probably refer to Indiana terminology, rules and such, but they're similar in other states as well. So according to the Indiana Secretary of State, a nonprofit corporation is a corporation whose purpose is to engage in activities that do not provide financial profit to the benefit of its members. So in order to become a nonprofit entity in Indiana, you first have to register with the Indiana Secretary of State. Then you have to apply for exemption with the IRS. So when you apply for exemption with the IRS, you're considered a tax exempt entity. There are several different types of tax exempt organizations recognized by the IRS. The most common one are 501c3 organizations. So these are going to be your charitable, education, scientific organizations that most people think of when they think of nonprofits. So this is going to be your Habitat, Boys and Girls Club, YMCAs. And so when most people think of a nonprofit organization, that's the type of organization that they think of. So again, in order to be considered a nonprofit organization, you have to be registered with both the state that you're in and then also with the IRS. So that's how it kind of gets started. So what is a nonprofit? Nonprofits are different from for-profit entities, and here's a few reasons why. So one of the big things is that every nonprofit has a mission statement that states why the organization exists and what it needs and what needs it was created to fill. These entities receive favorable tax exempt status from the IRS because many nonprofits are providing some type of service that normally a government entity would have to fulfill. And so since that government entity is not doing it and the nonprofit organization is doing it instead, the IRS is giving them favorable tax treatment where they don't have to pay income taxes. Funding. Nonprofits receive a wide variety of funding depending on the nonprofit. Many times, again, when people think of nonprofit organizations, they think of the donations and the contributions that nonprofits get, which is true. They get a lot of contributions from individuals, businesses, foundations, but they can also get government funding. Nonprofits can also receive a fee for service in where the organization is providing some type of service. And then they get paid for that service. So just like a for-profit where they're providing some type of service and they're getting revenue from that. And then also some organizations have a large endowment or investment balance, and they will have earnings off of those investment balances. Like I said, nonprofit organizations, if you are registered, a true nonprofit registered with the IRS, do receive a tax exemption. So they do not have to pay income taxes. If you apply and receive an exemption also from local income taxes, sales tax and such, so don't have to worry about paying income taxes if you're a nonprofit. Also, they really exist for the public. Nonprofits provide some type of service to the community that they're in. They exist to benefit the public as a whole. And then finally, because nonprofits do, the stakeholder is the community, the public as a whole, they do have to provide some transparencies. So nonprofits are granted a special tax status. And in return, the IRS expects that they provide some of their information to the public. So for example, an organization's tax exempt form 1023 or form 1024 is open to public inspection. Anyone can look at that. An organization's form 990 is open to public inspection. Anyone can look at it. So nonprofits do have more transparency than for-profits. So you can definitely find out more information about a nonprofit as far as who's running it, the governance, and the financials than a for-profit. So that's kind of some differences between a nonprofit and a for-profit. And then just kind of wanted to go over some common, basic thoughts with nonprofits. Just because we use the term nonprofit or not-for-profit does not mean that the organization should not or cannot make a profit. Of course, nonprofit organizations have to bring in more money than they spend in order for the organization to survive, in order for the organization to be sustainable into the future. It's just that what they do with those profits is different than a for-profit. So within a nonprofit, all of that excess revenue goes back into the nonprofit, goes back into providing those services in the future. Whereas a for-profit, that profit is sometimes paid out to the owners. And again, no one owns a nonprofit. So we have an executive director that runs the daily operations of a nonprofit. We have staff. We have a board of directors that's ultimately responsible for a nonprofit, but really no one person or entity owns a nonprofit organization. As I mentioned, nonprofits do receive a tax exemption from paying federal and state income taxes. However, they still might be liable for unrelated business income tax. So, and that, I'm not really going to go into that a bunch here. We do have some other webinars and blogs related to unrelated business income tax. But if your organization receives income that is not related to your primary purpose and it is conducted in a business manner on a regular basis, that might be considered unrelated business income, and therefore you might have to pay taxes on it. So just something to keep in mind. Nonprofits, obviously, again, don't pay income tax, so they don't have to file an income tax return. However, they are required to file an annual information return with the IRS called Form 990. And again, this provides, excuse me, this provides much more information than a regular, a for-profit tax return. So not only do we have financial information with the nonprofit, but also, again, governance, information on what kind of policies and procedures the organization has in place, a lot more information about the nonprofit. Within a nonprofit, private benefit is not allowed. So again, I noted that, nonprofits exist for the public benefit and no one owns a nonprofit. So in order to maintain that nonprofit status, we need to make sure that no private individual benefits specifically from an organization. And then finally, with a nonprofit, Indiana, the state of Indiana, the law actually requires a minimum of 3 board members. So since we're talking about boards today, I thought I'd throw that in there. So if your board does not have at least 3 board members, you might want to go off there and make sure you can find a 3rd board member to make sure you're in compliance with the state law. So again, we want to remember, as we're talking about our board duties today, the makeup of how an organization, a nonprofit, runs. We have our board of directors. They are ultimately responsible for the organization. However, they have assigned the duties to carry out the everyday operations to an executive director. Now, you might call this person a CEO, a president, whatever you call them. This one person is considered the only employee of the board of directors. So we as board members, we hire one person, the executive director, and that's the one employee that we worry about. The executive director then, they are responsible for hiring the staff. They are responsible for managing the staff and the daily operations. We also want to remember that the executive director reports to the board of directors. The board does not report to the executive directors. I know in some organizations, it might seem backwards, that maybe the executive director is the one recruiting board members and doing some other things that maybe should fall on the board as a responsibility of the board. But we want to remember that truly the executive director reports to the board and not the other way around. So the IRS believes that a well-governed organization is more likely to obey tax laws and make sure that, they're serving their charitable purposes and doing what they're supposed to be doing than one that's not so well-governed. They also believe that an active and engaged board is more important to the success of an organization. So that's really why it's so important to understand what your board responsibilities are. And that's kind of why we decided to do this seminar today. So before we even talk about what our board responsibilities are, and before you join a board, there are some things that you should find out before saying, yes, I want to become a part of this board. And so for you, those of you that are not on a board yet, these might be some things to think about. If you are currently on a board, you might want to think back to see if these are things that you knew before you joined the board. So first, who are the current board members? So the IRS, again, believes the importance of a well-governed, very active board of directors, but also that board needs to be independent and represent a broad public interest. So what do we mean about independent? If we have too many family members or too many individuals that maybe work at the same company on a board, that could hinder its ability to act in the best interest of the organization. And those individuals are not going to be considered independent. Now, there are many private family foundations that do have a board that consists mainly of family members. And that's fine. I'm talking more about public charities today as opposed to private foundations. So when we're looking at our board makeup, we want to really get a broad representation of the community that we serve to make sure that those people that are coming to the table bring the correct experiences and backgrounds to make the best decisions for the organization. There is a question on Form 990 that your organization has to complete every year with the IRS that asks who your board members are and if there are any relationships. Now, obviously, if there are relationships, that's fine. The IRS wants to know that, but really, best case scenario, they would like to have an independent board. So when you're going to join a board, it's good to ask who is currently on the board, not only so you can determine if there is an independent representation, but also who is making decisions for the organization. Oftentimes, organizations will include their board members' names, pictures, who they work for on their website. So that may be something to go and look at before joining the board. Next, what is the board term? So if you're signing up for something, you want to know how long you're signing up for. So most organizations have a set number of years that someone can serve as a board member. So a very common term is that you will serve a 3-year term, and then you can serve a second 3-year term, and then after that you have to take a break. That is not how all nonprofits work, and there's no requirement as to what the term has to be. Some organizations do not have term limits. And there's big discussion about that, term limits versus non-term limits. There are pros and cons. The bylaws of the organization are going to determine the length of board service. So when you are asked or interested in joining a board, you want to find out what the board term is for that organization, what you are signing up for. Next, when does the board meet? So nonprofit organizations have board meetings. The frequency of the board meeting varies by organizations. Some organizations will meet every month. Some will meet quarterly. Some will meet, 5 times a year. It just depends on the organization. Oftentimes, organizations that are newer or have a lot going on are going to meet more often than organizations that have been around for a long time and are pretty set in what's going on. The board might not have to be as active in some of those situations. So it's going to vary as to how often the board meets. So you want to find out when those board meetings are as well. Are they the first Tuesday of every month, or, are they in the evening? Are they in the morning? And then you also want to find out, how long do these board meetings last? I've been in board meetings where they've lasted less than an hour, but then I've also been in board meetings that have lasted, 2 to 3 hours. So it just depends, again, on the organization, but that is something that you definitely want to find out before joining a board to make sure that that does fit within your schedule and that you're able to commit to. Speaking of board meetings, I wanted to provide kind of a sample agenda of a board meeting, a typical board meeting. A couple things I want to mention: the use of a consent agenda. So the whole idea of a consent agenda is to put items that do not need to have a lot of discussion. So for example, the prior board meeting minutes or committee reports that really don't need to be discussed. It's more of a report to the full board. Sometimes financial statements will also be considered in the consent agenda. Financial statements should only be concluded in the consent agenda if the organization doesn't have any financial issues. If there are financial issues that are going on, those really should be separated out and discussed. But again, with the consent agenda, the key of using that consent agenda is to be able to approve all of these things at once and then spend more time talking about things that really need to be discussed. I have seen some organizations use a consent agenda, but then they still talk about everything that's in the consent agenda. So if you're using a consent agenda, treat it as what a consent agenda should be how it should be treated. These are the items we're going to vote on, no discussion. Okay, yay or nay, we're moving on. Now, if there are things included in the consent agenda that someone needs to discuss or wants to discuss, you can certainly pull those items out separately and discuss them. That's fine. But if you are going to have a consent agenda, treat it like it should be, approve it, and move on. Other items that are typically included in a board meeting, business updates. So then again, we have like investment committee reports or finance committee reports or other committee reports that need to have a little bit more discussion. So not those that are just, hey, this is what we talked about included in the consent agenda, but more of, we really need to talk about these items, so we're going to separate these out. Discussion topics. This is the time where we can really get the board involved. So instead of just sitting there listening to reports, having your board members actually engage in discussion. And these should be more strategic, either talking about, your strategic plan, new policies, new programs, but really taking advantage of this time to hear from your board members on those types of things. Board training and mission moment. Board training, it doesn't matter how long someone has served on a board. It's always good to have a reminder of what your responsibilities are. And so if you can take a few minutes each board meeting just to, kind of put some reminders out there. Hey, as a board member, this is one of your responsibilities. Let's take 5 minutes and talk about what this means tonight. So again, providing that additional training to your board members. And then mission moment, that's really a reminder of why they are serving your nonprofit organization, whether it be someone from your program coming in and sharing how the organization has impacted them, or maybe somebody having a staff person come in so the board members can find out more about a certain program. It's really more of that heartfelt, this is what we're doing and, all the good things that we're doing within our community. Executive session. You may not necessarily need to have an executive session every meeting. However, it's really good to have that scheduled just in case you do need to have one. And then also, if for some reason you really need to have one, people aren't like, oh my gosh, they're having an executive session today. They've never had one before. So just having it as a regularly scheduled agenda item is best practices for that. So just kind of wanted to give you a sample agenda. I'm sure boards have different types of meetings. I know I've been to different ones, but this is kind of a generic sample of what would be discussed in a board meeting. So continuing on questions to ask, again, what is the time commitment? So we talked about, board meetings, how long do they last? What is the commitment for those board meeting minutes or board meetings? However, being a board member goes beyond just attending board meetings. So you might have to serve on a committee, or you might have to volunteer within the organization, or you might have to attend a special event. So what other commitments, expectations are there of your board members before actually joining the board? What is the financial commitment? So one of the responsibilities of board members is to ensure the organization has adequate financial resources, meaning they need to have money to do what they need to do. If board members do not give to a nonprofit organization, why should anyone else? So it's very important that your board members, you as a board member, financially contribute to the organization that you're serving. Now, it does not have to be a significant amount of money. It just depends on the organization. Some organizations will just say, we would like all board members to contribute something. Some organizations will say, we would like to be, at the top of your list when you donate to nonprofits, or we would like you to make a significant gift, and then you have to decide what that significant gift is. Now, some organizations will say, we expect our board members to give X dollars. So because that varies from organization to organization, that is something that you need to find out what the expectation is before joining the board. Because that really is part of your responsibilities of being a board member. Does the organization have D&O insurance? So directors and officers insurance is not required to be held by nonprofit organizations. However, it is best practices, and really every organization should have this. Again, the board is ultimately responsible for the organization, and so D&O insurance protects against any allegations of poor management. So making sure that the organization does have D&O insurance in place. Most organizations do. It's not a significant cost to the organization, but that would be something that I always ask before I join a board. Is the organization current on its payroll taxes? So if you have employees, obviously, if you don't have employees, then you don't have to worry about this. But if an organization has employees, the nonprofit is responsible for paying payroll taxes, just like any for-profit. We need to make sure, though, that they are up to date on remitting those and paying those payroll taxes, because that can come back on the board of directors individually. So just making sure that, yep, we pay our payroll taxes when we need to pay them, they're all up to date. Again, payroll is a huge issue with the IRS. So just making sure, again, your organization is following the requirements for payroll. When was the last time a strategic plan was done? So obviously, I think we all know what a strategic plan is, but to make sure that the organization is advancing its mission, it's really important that the organization have a current plan in place. Now, in the past, it used to be that an organization would do a 5-year strategic plan. However, and some organizations still do, but really due to the ever-changing environment, the pandemic, a shorter plan is really more useful. So I've seen 3-year plans, or even 1 to 2 year plans, just because everything is constantly evolving, making sure that there is some kind of plan in place so that the organization, kind of has a roadmap to where it's going. And then another thing to ask is, can I see a copy of the organization's Form 990? So again, this Form 990 provides a lot of information about the organization, both financially and non-financially. So getting a copy of the 990 just to look it over to see what's being reported is going to provide you a great amount of information about the organization. And if you want to, you can even go and search on the IRS website for the organization and pull up the most recent 990. You can also do this on other websites. Candid is another one that provides free access to nonprofit 990s. On the IRS website specifically, you just have to be careful that you type the organization's legal name in correctly. Otherwise, it won't come up. So if you were to go in and type an organization's name in and it doesn't come up, and you're sure it's a nonprofit organization, you might want to check to see if that's the correct spelling, the correct legal name that you're putting in. But again, Form 990 is open to the public. Anyone can look at it. So I really encourage you to look at the organization's 990 before joining a board. So you've gone through, you've asked your questions, you know about the organization. So before you say yes, there are 3 questions that I really think that you should ask yourself. Do you support the organization's mission? Can you meet all of the board members' expectations as far as, going when the meetings are, the financial information that you need to, or financial amount you need to support, serving on committees? And then, am I able to financially support the organization within the expectation that they have? So, again, just kind of some final 3 thoughts to think about before you say yes to an organization, because this is a really big deal. You are becoming a leader of the organization. So you want to make sure that you can contribute the proper amount of time, resources, commitment to the organization before saying yes. All right. So now we're going to move into some really the nuts and bolts of what the responsibilities are of board members. There are 3 fiduciary duties of all nonprofit board members: duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. Really what these are saying is, when you as a board member make sure that you are thinking of the nonprofit first, you're putting them first before any other, yourself or any other business or personal gains. Make sure that you make good decisions. And then also make sure that you are ensuring that the organization follow all the rules and requirements it's supposed to do. So those are kind of basic, big picture, 3 duties of a nonprofit board member. However, BoardSource has also come up with 10 basic responsibilities of nonprofit boards. So if you are not familiar with BoardSource, I would highly encourage you to go visit their website, boardsource.org. They have a lot of free information out there for board members. There's you can sign up for a membership and get access to additional resources. However, there's a lot of free information out there as well. So I just want to briefly go over the 10 basic responsibilities and what that means as a board member. So first, determine the mission and the purpose. The board is ultimately responsible for the mission of the organization. Obviously, we have staff and the executive director that's going to carry out that daily mission, but the board is ultimately responsible for setting the mission and the purpose. We want to make sure that we don't have mission drift and that our mission is current in what we're doing. The IRS asks on the annual 990 what the organization's mission statement is that has been approved by the board. So we want to make sure that our mission statement is approved. And we also want to make sure that we look at it every so often to, again, make sure that this is truly what our organization is doing. So as a board member, some questions that you can ask related to this are, does the mission statement need to be revised? Have we drifted from our mission? And sometimes that happens, sometimes on accident, and we need to get back to what we're truly organized to do. But sometimes we do drift and we need to evaluate our programs and say, okay, we need to change what we're doing, and this is why. Does the organization's purpose articulate goals? And then how can board members get the organization's story out? Okay. Number 2, select the chief executive. So again, I noted before that the board has 1 employee, the executive director. And they are the ones that the board has entrusted the daily operations of the organization to. Also, as part of the board's responsibility is succession planning. So even if you aren't currently looking for an executive director, a CEO, you really should have some type of plan in place for when your current executive director leaves, because at some point they're going to leave. They are either going to leave and take a job someplace else, or they're going to retire, or hopefully not, they may get terminated. But your current executive director is going to leave at some point. So you really should have some type of plan in place for when that happens. So when that happens, again, whether you're currently looking for an executive director or in the future when that happens, the board is responsible for searching for the most qualified individual for the position at that time. So some organizations might need a CEO that has more experience with fundraising, because we really need to work on our fundraising right now. We really need to get some new grants in. Some organizations instead might need an executive director that has a lot of experience with programs or creating new programs. So it really depends where the organization is in its life cycle and what's going on as to the type of individual that you need to run the organization. The board also needs to have a consensus on what the responsibilities are of that person, you know, what they're supposed to be doing. And then, but also keeping in mind that there are specific distinct differences between board member responsibilities and CEO responsibilities. And we really need to make sure as board members that we don't overstep that and be clear of, okay, these are our board member duties, these are executive director duties, and we as board members don't want to step on the foot of the executive director. So as a board member, some questions that you can ask related to this responsibility. Does the chief executive's job description need revised? So hopefully you have a written job description in place for your executive director. If you don't, I would highly recommend putting one in place. And if you do, pull it out, look at it. Is it still relevant? Does it need revised? What are the goals and priorities of the chief executive? And make sure that they are aware of it, that you communicate those to them. And then finally, is there a succession plan in place for when that executive director does leave? And there's also succession plans, like emergency succession plans. So for example, if an executive director were suddenly needed to leave for a short period, but then are going to return, you know, maybe an illness or a family matter or something, and they just need to take a few months off, but they will return, somebody needs to take over those responsibilities. So you should really have some kind of plan in place for those emergency situations, as well as when an executive director steps away permanently. Number 3, support and evaluate the chief executive. So we're going to break these into 2 different pieces and talk first about supporting the executive director. So how can you as a board member support your executive director? So make sure you attend board meetings. You signed up for this. They really need your input. Attend the board meetings, be on time, and be prepared. So be prepared means read the documents ahead of time. Don't show up to the meeting not knowing what was provided to you in advance. Ask questions. Be actively involved within the organization. If you have a question, someone else probably has the exact same question. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Participate in the annual evaluation process, provide constructive feedback. So hopefully your organization does an annual evaluation of your executive director, and hopefully you get feedback from all board members on that. Offer a pat on the back if there's something that they did well. You know, oftentimes nonprofit executive directors are pulled in lots of different directions, have a lot going on. So I'm sure that they would always appreciate a nod, you know, a pat on the back when something is very well done, that recognition. Provide opportunities for them to speak or attend community functions. So oftentimes nonprofit board members are involved in other organizations, other associations, whether it be like Rotary or Kiwanis, the type of things. Provide opportunities for your ED to get in front of those people, those groups. Because that allows them to share the story of the organization to all of those new people. Again, and then the key is getting your story of your organization out into the community. Encourage time off to recharge, encourage attendance and trainings and continued education, offer support during both good and difficult times. So really making sure that the ED has the moral and professional support to further the goals of the organization. If your ED is burnt out and not getting any support, your organization is probably not succeeding in moving forward. The relationship between the board and the executive director is a very important one, especially between the board chair and the executive director. So making sure that the executive director feels supported is very important in the success of the organization. So the second part to that, number 3, is evaluating the chief executive. So I mentioned, participating in the annual evaluation of your executive director. And so let's talk a little bit about what that involves. There are some different areas that you can evaluate your executive director on, because again, they play a very important role across a lot of different spectrums. So, if their success in the vision, the mission, the strategies, program, fundraising, operations, being a connector to the community, all different kinds of areas. So this evaluation is really a time to not necessarily beat down on them for doing things wrong, but to recognize the accomplishments and discuss any concerns that you might have. It should be used to clarify the board's expectations of the ED's role. So maybe things have changed, or maybe you want them to focus on a certain area. This is the time to communicate to that to them. Most organizations will have all of board members provide feedback. Others may also get feedback from higher level staff that work directly with the executive director, because that's going to provide a different view for the board to look at that the board might not, or they don't get to see working every day with the executive director. It just depends, but just make sure that you do have some kind of process in place to, at least annually talk to your ED about what's going on, expectations, providing this type of feedback. And I said that the IRS is very big on payroll and payroll taxes, salaries. One of their main concerns is excessive compensation. Now, I know in our area in Indiana with nonprofits, there's probably not a lot of nonprofit executive directors getting overpaid. However, you should still document how you're determining your executive director salary. So the IRS specifically says that a nonprofit, when you determine your executive director, your CEO's compensation, it should really be reviewed and approved by independent persons. So either your governance committee, your HR committee, someone. You should look at comparability data. So look at other organizations that are similar in size to you, that do similar type of things, that are in the similar area, to see how much they're paying their executive directors. Now I know there's a Northeast Indiana salary guide that comes out every 2 years that has a lot of information on pay and benefits for nonprofit organizations. So if you don't, or if you aren't aware of that, that would be something to look at. Also looking at other organizations' 990s, if they're done properly, the executive director's salary and benefits are reported on there. Now, when you do comparability data though, just keep in mind that what your executive director's background, education, experience is compared to some others, because what you may end up paying them more because maybe they have a higher degree or are expected to do more than someone else. So the comparability data is a starting point, but then documenting why or why not you're paying them at those levels. And then again, finally, the last thing is contemporaneous substantiation of the deliberation and decision, which means you need to document why you decided this. So different ways to document it is looking at the employee, having a written employee contract in place, a job description, the salary structure. Is it salaries? Is it bonuses? What are the benefits? Those types of things. So there's some other items listed there. So it's very important that your organization document the amount you're paying your executive director, approve it, and it should be done annually as well, just in case the IRS or someone were to come in and ask, question the salary level of your executive director. Okay, number 4. Ensure effective planning. So the executive director is responsible for designing and conducting the strategic plan, but the board is really responsible for setting and guiding the strategic direction. Most organizations will have a board retreat to really sit down and focus on the strategic plan. And again, I said before that in the past, strategic plans might have been 5 years, and now they're being shortened just because of everything that's going on. But you as a board member should participate in the strategic planning process. Ask about the goals and how the different steps are being met, that type of thing. Some questions to ask. Do we as a board discuss strategic issues at board meetings? And if we are not, maybe that's something that we need to add into that discussion line on the agenda to talk about more. Is the strategic plan realistic? And then what metrics are used to monitor the effectiveness? A plan is not useful if we can't go back and monitor it and determine, measure how we are being successful against the plan. Number 5, monitor and strengthen programs. So sometimes within an organization, we have to reallocate our resources. And sometimes that's just because of competition or a program is no longer needed. So sometimes we have to make the hard decision as a board member to get rid of a program or to add a program. So you as a board member really need to understand what programs your organization offers. Some programs are not going to be generating revenue. We're going to do them for free, and that's fine. That's what we do. But you need to know that and know which ones do generate revenue and which ones don't. You also need to know which one are your signature programs. Those programs, that's what your organization is known for and why. Things to ask, what is the impact that we have on our community? What data will help us assess effectiveness of our programs? What difference are we truly trying to make as a nonprofit organization? And are those programs adding to that? And then how do we know if we are succeeding in our mission? Okay. Next, number 6, ensure adequate financial resources. So I touched on this a little bit earlier about providing a financial contribution to the organization. So you as a nonprofit board member, not only making sure that, everybody in the board gives something, but also where are we getting our funding from? And is that sufficient? And making sure that we don't spend beyond our means. So if your organization gets too much money from a specific source or a specific donor, that's called a concentration. If that donor or source of revenue were to go away, that might negatively impact your organization, and the fact that you are going to have to try and replace that revenue quickly. And can you do that? So some questions to ask. Where's our support coming from? So again, are we fee for service? Are we heavily reliant on contributions or grants? If we are, do we get a lot of money from a certain funder? What is the optimal percentage of contributions, earned income, government funding, etc.? Some organizations get all of their money 100% from contributions. That's fine. That's how they're set up to be. Some organizations get 100% from earned income. They're providing some type of service and get paid in return. That's fine. You need to figure out what is best for your organization, if there is a mixture, and what that mixture should be. Do we need to diversify funding? Again, are we heavily reliant on a certain funding source that if that funding source went away, we would be in trouble? And then should an annual dollar goal be set for board giving? So some organizations will not necessarily say, hey, we need each of our board members to give X dollars this year. We're going to say as a whole, our board needs to give X amount. Some organizations do that, some do not. Something to consider as you join a board. I wanted to throw in some fundraising tips because I know oftentimes board members kind of get squeamish when they are told that they have to do fundraising event or fundraising. So here are some tips that might be less easier to do, let's say. First of all, first one, make a personal contribution. So you yourself as a board member, make a contribution, write a check to your organization. Attend fundraising events. Easy, right? Have a clear understanding of the organization's mission and and programs and share with others. So as you're out and about, at work, at church, at your other activities that you go to, share about the organization that you serve. And then that tells other people all the good things that the organization is doing within the community, and they are more likely to contribute and to support the organization as well. Make introductions to possible donors, identify possible grant opportunities. A lot of nonprofit board members serve on multiple boards in the community. So you might hear of different grant opportunities and say, hey, that might be a good fit for this organization. So share that with the organization. And then use social media. So, if your organization that you're serving on posts something on Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram, share that. It just, more people that are aware of the organization, more support the organization is likely to get. Number 7, protect the assets and provide financial oversight. So the last one was more about getting money into the organization. So this is more about providing the oversight over those funds. Review and approve the annual budget. Yes, that is something that you as a board member need to do. Also, when you're looking at that budget, look at budget to actual. Are we on pace where we need to be? Ensure proper controls are in place. Understand your organization's financial statements. And I'm going to stop right there. So oftentimes it is said that a nonprofit needs to have a treasurer that is a CPA. That is not true. Your board treasurer does not have to be a CPA. Your board treasurer does need to have some kind of understanding of nonprofit financials. Just because they are a CPA, they might prepare individual income taxes and have no idea what nonprofit accounting is. So they do not need to be a CPA. They do need to have some kind of understanding of your nonprofit financials. Secondly, if you are not the board treasurer, you cannot rely 100% on the board treasurer for being responsible for protecting assets and providing financial oversight. Yes, the board treasurer is leading that charge because they do have that additional understanding, but you as a board member, you also need to understand the organization's financials. So if you do not understand financials, which is perfectly fine, not everyone deals with financials every day. We don't want a whole bunch of accountants on the board. That would be bad. But if you need to get some additional understanding of how your financials work, ask your board treasurer, ask your outside, if you have an audit done, ask the audit team to come in and explain them to you. We just need to ensure that you as a board member have an understanding, a basic understanding of your financials, because that is really your duty. I mentioned an audit. If your organization has an audit, you as a board member need to review that audit and approve it. You do not have to have an audit done. There are only certain circumstances that audits have to be done. So you don't necessarily have an audit done depending on your circumstances. But then also reviewing the annual Form 990. That is information reported to the IRS. Your name is listed on there as a board member. So you really need to review that and make sure the questions are answered properly. Again, if you don't understand the Form 990, that's okay, ask. There are additional trainings out there for you to get to know what to ask for, to what to look for. Ask the board treasurer, ask the CFO of the organization. They are probably more than willing to provide you to answer your questions so they can get some additional input on those financials. So just because you do not have a financial background does not excuse you from this responsibility. It is still a responsibility for you as a board member. It just might be an area that some additional support, some additional training might be needed for your board members. So some questions to ask: should an audit be performed? Again, it doesn't necessarily have to have an audit done every year. It just depends on your organization and what's going on. There are some instances where audits are required. Are financial statements reliable and timely? If you're not getting your financial statements timely to look at, then the decisions that you're making are being made on old information, and you really need to make sure that those financial statements that you're getting to your board every month are timely. And then what are the current level of reserves as far as, how much cash do we have on hand? Do we need to address that? Number 8, build a competent board. So 2 things. First, building your board, having a list of people on the bench to join the board should be ongoing. And then secondly, recruiting board members is not your executive director's duty. It's your board members' duties. So making sure that you are continuously looking for new board members, because even if you don't have term limits, there are going to be times when your board members step down. So you want to make sure that you have new board members coming up through the pipeline to serve. Making sure also that you're orienting new board members through an orientation process, so they're not just jumping on blindly, so that they are provided some kind of background before starting. And then evaluating the board as a whole, how they're doing. So some questions to ask: what constitutes a balanced board? So how many people do we need on our board? Again, it varies by organization. What type of people? Varies by organization. Have our board responsibilities and expectations been communicated to everyone? And do our committees have charters? Real quick, onboarding board members. So if you don't currently have a board member orientation, something to consider. So here's some information on the slides to consider within your onboarding process. And then also offboarding. So not only, these people serve on your board and dedicate their time to the organization. So once they leave, you really don't want to lose that relationship. So here are some tips on offboarding board members, but maybe still keeping them somewhat connected to the organization. Number 9, ensure legal and ethical integrity. So making sure that the organization is compliant, that they're providing they're making documents available that are supposed to be made available to the public, their accountability with code of conduct, whistleblower policy and such. So more of those legal issues. So the big question here to ask is, how does the organization keep up with those changing laws and regulations? So if something changes, if a requirement changes, you have to file a new form, or you have to submit something different to the IRS, or you have to do something else with this grant, who within the organization, how is our organization notified of that? How do we keep up to date on that? And then also, is it clear who is responsible for implementing these policies? And finally, number 10, enhancing the organization's public standing. So again, making sure that you understand what the organization does, so you can articulate the mission, the goals to who you come into contact. Because you are an advocate for your organization. So you are going out there and advocating for what the organization does. Questions to ask: how are public policy proposals monitored, and how do those affect our organization? Who's going to speak for the organization and on what matters? So sometimes things happen within the community that directly affect your organization, and maybe like a news person might come towards the organization to get a comment, or they might see, hey, you're on the board, I want a comment from you. So making sure that you are clear as to who is responding to those, so we don't get a bunch of mixed messages, is important. And then along with that, making sure a communication plan is in place. I know we're kind of running short on time, but I did want to briefly go over some committee response, just what the committees are. So the number of committees an organization varies. If you have a larger board, you're probably going to have more committees. One thing to keep in mind as a board member is determining if you are required to serve on a committee. Most organizations will expect your board members to serve on at least one committee. The executive committee, most organizations do have an executive committee. It consists of the officers of the board, and they kind of meet in times when a full board can't meet. Now, there are some instances where the executive committee continuously meets. Other times with organizations, it's more they meet on an as-needed basis when, again, the full board can't meet. One thing to be very careful about with your executive committee is that your executive committee, and really all of these committees, they are not a replacement of the full board. The executive committee really cannot make decisions that should go to the full board. The executive committee can make recommendations that are then taken to the full board to approve, but the executive committee cannot act really they need to be careful on the decisions that they're making. And again, not replace the full board. There are some sort of situations where executive committee and executive committee meetings kind of seem to replace the full board, and we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. Governance committee is also a very common committee that most organizations have. They deal more with governance, getting new board members in, making sure board members are following the responsibilities of what they need to be doing. Finance committee, they're the financial arm of it. Some organizations will also have like an audit committee or an investment committee, but very small organizations, all of that is usually tied up into your finance committee. So again, those people that have a more robust background with finances probably will serve on this committee. There are also other committees that organizations have, whether it be in HR, program development, maybe just ad hoc committees. So you want to find out what committees the organization has. Those are included in the bylaws. So if you get a copy of the organization's bylaws, it will list what your standing committees are. And then also if there's any ad hoc committees that can be added. Officer responsibilities. So obviously there are general board members, directors, but then there are the officers, chair or president, vice chair or vice president, and your secretary or treasurer. Some organizations, as they fill these board officer roles, will have the individuals work through each role. So let's say you serve as a treasurer, then you go to the secretary, vice chair, and then chair, or maybe you come in as the vice chair and then you automatically go to the chair. Not all organizations work that way. So some organizations, it is assumed that if you are vice chair, you become chair next year. Other ones, it does not. So you want to make sure that you understand not only the process of fulfilling those officer positions, so how that works within your organization. Obviously, the board chair, they're the ones that are leading the board meetings. They have a very unique relationship with the executive director. Oftentimes they act as an alternate spokesperson on behalf of the organization. So you want to make sure that the board chair is well versed on what is going on within the organization, and is really seen as a second leader within the organization. So that is a very high profile role, lots of responsibilities. So you want to make sure that the correct person fills that leadership role. Vice chair kind of serves as an alternate to the chair if they can't, for some reason, can't attend a meeting or can't do something. Secretary, they either primarily duty is to either take the board meeting minutes, or if you have an organization staff take the board meeting minutes, they sign off on those. Board treasurer, we kind of talked about that, making sure that the finances are where they need to be. Again, does not need to necessarily be a CPA, but needs to be somebody that has some kind of financial background, understand your nonprofit financials. So with that, I know those last few slides were kind of fast, but again, we will email out all of the slides to you so you have all of that information. So if you have additional questions, feel free to contact us. Also wanted to provide you just some resources that we have on our website. You can sign up for future webinars. You can see recordings of our previous webinars. You can also access our nonprofit blog, Mission Minded, that has all kinds of topics on there for nonprofits. Again, the slides will be emailed out to all of you, and they have each of our team members' email on there. So feel free to contact us if there's anything that we can do for you. And again, I just thank you for attending, and thank you for all that you do for your nonprofit and for our community. Thank you.